Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to complete a Space Marines combat patrol. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. For some reason I haven't yet determined, I've decided that it would be a good idea to complete a new combat patrol every month. Now, last month in July, we completed the Dark Angels Combat Patrol, and this month we're going to tackle the Space Marine Combat Patrol. But before we dive into that, I want to talk very briefly about the end of summer. I know that in a previous video I complained about how incredibly hot and humid it can be here in Tokyo, but thankfully that's starting to come to a close. While it is still the tail end of August and in midday, it still gets blisteringly hot. Mercifully, as the sun sets in the evenings, a cool breeze comes in off the ocean, and the weather is actually fantastic. These 4 weeks between summer and autumn are the absolute best time of the year in Japan. It's sort of this magical period before the autumn arrives. Now, while that's got us in a great mood, let's talk about this week's project. We are going to complete the Space Marine Combat Patrol. Now, as it turns out, I've actually already painted most of the units necessary to complete this combat patrol in my Dark Angels army. I have a massive Deathwing force that I completed over the years that you can see in my showcase here. So I've already got a lot of my bases covered for this one, but there are a few changes that need to be made and a new unit that needs to be painted up. So let me show you how I completed the Space Marine Combat Patrol for August. The Combat Patrol is led by a captain in Terminator armor, and as it turns out, I've already got one of those. It's an older model, but it checks out. The other thing we're going to need is a Librarian in Terminator armor. He has a Force Stave instead of a Force Axe, but we all know the axe is cooler, so let's take care of that by quickly snipping off his hand at the wrist and turning to the Lion's Pride STL pack. We're going to print one of these really great power axes, and once that's ready, using some super glue, attach it to the model. From there, it's just a matter of priming it, laying down our metallic colors using Games Workshop Lead Belcher. Then we'll work our way through all the gold ornamentation on the axe. We'll start with Gehenna's gold, and then we'll shade everything with Reichland Flesh Shade gloss. Once that's dry, we'll go back with some Liberator gold and hit our highlights again. This is going to keep the gold from looking sort of flat and lifeless, give it some dimensionality, and really make it pop. And with that, our Librarian is ready to go. The next thing we're going to need is 5 Terminators, and as it turns out, I've got about 40 of those. Now, the datasheet calls for an assault cannon and not a plasma cannon, so we're going to swap that out. I wanted to use this really great Terminator from the 6th edition starter, as he's very Dark Angels, but try as I might, because I assembled him with plastic glue, that plasma cannon would not come off. So I found another one, and with a little effort, that popped off with a satisfying snap. Trolling my bits box, however, I found this, the original assault cannon for that model. I also have a ton of lightning claws for some reason. Lining it up, it looks like it's going to be a fit without any problems, so I went ahead and drilled a hole in the shoulder, and using some super glue, I embedded a 2mm magnet. I took a second to make sure that it was pushed in flush, and then put the mating magnet on the arm itself, and they clicked together perfectly. And in case you were wondering, yes, I magnetized the plasma cannon as well. I then painted the assault cannon. Here I am applying some lead belcher, and then I'm using some light green on the ropes. These will be darkened down later. Once I get my base colors in, I'll use a series of shades on the model. Seraphim Sepia on the bone white, Beal Tan green on the ropes, and of course, Nuln Oil on all the metallics. The final unit of the Combat Patrol are the Infernus Marines, and while I assemble those, I want to talk to you about this video's sponsor, Baron of Dice. Baron of Dice is your one-stop shop for dice for all your favorite games, not just 40K. Their hand-swirled and laser-etched resin dice ensure that there are 0 mold lines, no balance issues, and no micro bubbles. They have dozens of different designs and color combinations to match your favorite factions. Head on over to baronofdice.com and enter the code THEHAMMER for a discount on your purchase. And be sure to tell them the Trip sent you. Returning to the Infernus Marines, we're going to print some custom bits from the Lion's Pride STL pack from Grey Tide Studios. including some really great shoulder pauldrons and some braziers for their power packs. The braziers go on without a hitch, matching the curve along the top of the power pack perfectly. The shoulder pauldrons are a different story. Of course, these are molded in, so we have no choice but to maul the models. Look away if you're squeamish. This is the sort of thing that takes a little bit of courage to do, but once you're underway, there's no turning back. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just need to pare it down so that there's enough contact area to attach the new 3D printed shoulder pauldron. The results here look great, and it's really starting to look like a Dark Angels Marine. But I also found this really great tabard in the kit that matches the pose of the sergeant perfectly, so I attached that as well. I primed the model in black using Vallejo airbrush primer, and when that was dry, I did a zenithal highlight of white primer over top. This defined all the shapes, and it's going to help us with our next paint. Caliban Green from Games Workshop's sort of semi-transparent, and if we apply it evenly all over the model, you'll be able to tell where the shadows and highlights are from the under priming. It's going to create additional volume on the model and take it to that next level. Then I'm going to dry brush the entire model using a lighter green here. The trick is to use a soft makeup brush and make sure that the brush is nearly dry of paint. If it does streak on some of the larger pauldrons or knee pads, it's okay, we're going to take care of that later. Once that's set, I'm going to give the model an all-over wash of Beal Tan green shade. This is going to settle into our recesses, make the darks darker, and also knock back that dry brush highlight a little bit, unifying the model. And now, this is one of my favorite parts. If the dry brush made the pauldron a little streaky, we're going to go ahead and use the airbrush here and hit it ever so slightly, creating a buttery smooth gradient. We'll do the same on the kneecaps here and any other part of the model that would catch the light, like the back leg. Once that's set, I'm going to move on to my metallics. Here, I've kept the power pack separate to make it easier to paint, and I'm just using lead belcher on all the metal parts. Next, we're going to work our way around the model using Ushabti bone. We're going to use it on the tabard here as a layer, and on all these pouches and his holster. This looks strange, but it's going to pay off in a minute. Here, I'm going to paint the holster and the purity seals all in one shot, and then we'll separate them later. We're going to use this on the chest as well. In this case, it's going to take 2 thin coats for really great coverage. I'm going to use Mournfang Brown on the scabbard here as well as some other places just to mix it up in the leathers. And returning to the chest, I'm going to shade these parts using Seraphim Sepia. This produces a really great result. As you can see, it brings out all the details, and we don't need to go in and painstakingly highlight each feather in the crest. We're going to hit that scabbard and the straps with Agrax Earth Shade to darken them down, give them some definition. Now, returning to those leather pouches in the holster, we're going to use Contrast Wildwood. Over top of the Ushabti bone, it does a really great job of creating a leather look. I laid down a gray base so that my reds would cover better, and I painted the weapon casings as is traditional with the Dark Angels in red. I then used lead belcher to fill in all the metallic parts on the Pyroblaster. Now, you'll notice here, I've actually decided to change the color of the heat guard that's on top. So in the next clip, you may notice that it's a copper color. I thought that was a better color break, and I'm just using some washes there to apply a heat effect to the end of the cover. And once that's all set, I'm going to go ahead and glue the power pack on. And once we've got that on the model, it's going to be easier to paint. Here, the trick to flames is actually really simple. You're just going to put down a yellow base coat, and then using a darker orange, you're going to dry brush from the back forwards, getting lighter as you go. Once I've accomplished that, I'm going to go through and paint the brazier itself. Here again, I'm just using lead belcher. Really great coverage on this. Now, it's sort of a tradition in my army that none of the sergeants wear a helmet. They're all hooded to sort of keep with that Dark Angels theme. So I've printed a 3D head here, painted it separately for ease of access, and we're going to use some super glue to attach that. The eyes on the other Marines are actually really simple. I'm just going to carefully apply some Corax white into the center of the lens, and then using some Blood Angels contrast, fill that in for a great effect. One of the last things we need to do here is apply our shoulder decals. There's a separate tutorial on my channel for this. I'm going to link it in the corner there, and you'll also find that in the description below. We want to make sure that the bases on these Marines matched what we've already established in the army, and all of my bases look like they are in a fortress monastery. So I've taken these 3D printed base toppers, attached them to the 32mm bases, and we're just going to prime them, paint them, wash them, and then dry brush them and bring out the details. Once we've got that set, we'll take the Marines off of their temporary bases, snip off the pegs that were meant to keep them in place, and then, using some super glue, attach them to the 3D printed bases to finish. And there you have it, a completed Space Marines combat patrol, which happens to be Dark Angels themed, as I had most of those units already completed. Now, I am sure at some point I'll get around to painting up the absolutely amazing Terminator models that were included in the Leviathan box set. But I wanted to have another playable force ready for the local games club, and this was the fastest way for me to do it. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to support the channel, check out our t-shirt shop, bakingsodatees.com. In celebration of reaching 3,000 subscribers, we've released our first merchandise and the Hammer of Wrath t-shirt, available in multiple colors. You can also find unique designs not available anywhere else. Please take a moment to like, comment, or subscribe, drive us to the front of YouTube, and help us grow our audience. Or you can always join us on Patreon. Joining our Patreon at any level grants you access to our private Discord server, where we share our progress and tips every day to help each other become better hobbyists. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.